I'd like to ask you a question. What is it that really impresses you about another person? Sometimes it can be maybe that person is famous in a activity that you like, whether it's sports or business or something of that nature. Sometimes it can be that the person you think is an impressive person in regards to aesthetically. Other times it could be that you're impressed by even what that person has accomplished in their life. But the fact remains that what impresses man very rarely also impresses God. And that is exactly what we're going to study tonight in our lesson as we continue in this lesson, More Than a Name, which is written by Dr. John Getch. And if I can stop there for just a second, I do not know Dr. Getch personally, but I know this past week he lost both his daughter and granddaughter in a car accident. And I would ask all of you that are listening to this lesson to maybe take a moment and pray for the Getch family as they grieve the loss of both his daughter and his granddaughter. I know that they would appreciate it. I'm appreciative of his ministry, and that has allowed us to learn more about our Lord. In tonight's lesson, in More Than a Name, we're going to talk about the lady with no name and no money, which means tonight we're talking about the widow woman who threw in her 2 mites before the Lord. You know, once again, what impresses us, and we all have different things that we're interested in, and there certainly is nothing wrong with that, but what impresses us it very rarely impresses God. And that is exactly what took place in this lesson. As we'll study it out, we see where the rich came by, and no doubt it was impressive to some, but yet it was the person who on face value was unimpressive that really impressed God. And to the moment that Jesus stepped in and pointed her out and gave us this critical lesson about having a submissive and sacrificial heart. Now, we're not given her name, and we're told little about her, but what we are given is a tremendous lesson for each and every one of us to learn. In Mark chapter 12, in verses 41 through 44, and I hope you have your Bible with you, it says, "And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. And many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast into of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living." I don't think anywhere else in the Bible do we see so much made of so little. Jesus used this event and this unnamed woman as a powerful teaching moment, as a powerful moment for us to learn from. That God uses little things in big ways because it is in those events that he receives the most glory. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27 and 29, it tells us that God chooses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and that God chooses the weak things of this world to confound the things which are mighty, and the base things of this world, and the things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. It's a reminder that God uses the things that sometimes are unimpressive to man, but yet impress him. And the thought is many times we look at it and that's how we measure what we do for the Lord, what we can do for the Lord. And many times we want to give God simply only the big things. But the question really should be, are we willing also to give our little so that God can turn it into his big? Because his big is no comparison to our big. Only he can take and multiply so little and make it so much. You know, many times we often wait so that we can do something big for the Lord, when it is God who wants us to be faithful in the little things that we have. And once again, that was this woman's testimony. That is this woman's testimony all these couple thousand years later of not having anything, no name, no money, but yet great big testimony. And so we'll see a few things tonight as we study this out, and we'll point out 3 things and examine them a little bit further. But the first thing we notice is the presence of God. It's the presence of God. It starts here in verse 41. It says, and Jesus sat against the treasury. Now, this is an interesting visual that we have, that the treasury is in a particular place in the temple. And the Bible tells us that Jesus is over there just sitting and looking. Now, that would be intimidating for many of us. At our church, we no longer pass an offering plate. We have giving receptacles at different exits throughout the auditorium, and many of us, like myself, choose to give digitally. And what we wouldn't want is somebody just looking over us as we give. But the fact is God is always watching. We'll see that here in our lesson, that the presence of God is always there. It's always there. And we're not simply only talking about finances tonight. We're really talking about every portion of our life. But it's the thought that we can be encouraged by the fact that Jesus was there, seeing and knowing all that was taking place. He saw all the rich people. He was unimpressed by them. And he saw what they gave. Not that what they gave was bad, but rather it did not impress the Lord. And yet he saw this widow woman who gave all that she had. We first see his omnipresence. What does that mean? Is very simply that God is in all places, that God is all present, that nothing is ever hidden from God. And we call this attribute of God omnipresent. Sometimes we use that term as something that is in a negative, that God always sees, that God is always there. But yet God also sees our heart, and he saw the heart of this woman. The fact is nothing in our life is ever hidden from God's view. And I believe that we as Christians probably know that, and we recognize that. But many times we forget to live out that part in our life, the fact that God truly is always present there with us. And, sometimes we think that God doesn't see something that we're doing wrong, or maybe even we think that God doesn't see the little things that we're doing right for him. But the fact is God does see. And the next thing we see is not just his omnipresent, but we also see his observation that he had. It says, and he beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. We can rejoice that God doesn't just see evil, he also sees the good that we do. Many times, once again, we think that these things that we do for the Lord that might not get any sort of recognition from man because it does not impress man. It does impress God. And it's a reminder that God does see. He does see everything that we do, whether it be good or whether it be evil. And, sometimes we even look and we think, what, God, don't you see the evil that is happening in our world? And we could talk at length about all the evil that is happening in our world and think, why doesn't God go ahead and just punish them or punish the evil? And it seems like all the good deeds that they're just simply not acknowledged in such a way. But the Bible does tell us that God does see those things and that God is a just God. And all those things will one day be rewarded. But the first thing we notice is the presence of God. We notice the presence of God. He was there. Jesus was there. He was sitting and watching. And Jesus is there with us. He is sitting with us. He is a constant in our lives. He is a constant present in our lives. And if we allow him to be, and he sees everything that is happening on in our life. The second thing that we see is the poverty of the woman. This woman did not have much. But just because this woman was impoverished did not mean that God's presence was not with her. If I could go back to the first point of God's presence, is that God was present with her even in her hardship. Not only for this incident that Jesus drew our attention to, but also in the hardships that got her to a place where she had no money. Got her into a place, which is the first small point here of having a lost spouse. I mean, really the name of this lesson could almost be no name, no money, and no man. That this woman had lost everything that was important in her life. The Bible tells us that there came a certain poor woman, and she was poor, in more ways than once. Many times we simply just equate that word poor to a monetary thing, but she truly was poor in many ways. And sometimes loss comes at different times in our lives and in many different ways, which was taking place in this woman's life. And for us, it could be a loss of job, a loss of health, getting a bad report from a doctor. It could be the loss of a friend or a loss of a relationship. And what many times happens after that is like what happened here, loss of a spouse. But what many times happens for us in those times is Satan uses those times to get us discouraged, to get us despondent, to get us to doubt and depressed. That he sees these opportunities as a way to get us with our eyes off of Christ. But we must fight these temptations with God's help, understanding that just because we have experienced loss does not mean that God's presence is far from us. God's presence was close with this woman, regardless of the fact that she was without a husband and without any money. We see the loss that she experienced. We see how little she had. This woman's poverty wasn't simply measured by the fact that she had lost her husband, but it was also measured by the fact that she lost all that she had. Now, we are not told how old this woman is. I think many times we simply just suppose that she was an older lady. It's very possible that she actually was not. And many times when that happens later in life, a lot of planning has gone into it to where the husband set up something for the spouse. We see that she has nothing. It could have been possible that her husband died unexpectedly and to where she was left with nothing. But thankfully, the widow did not calculate her worth based on material possession. Rather, she calculated her material possession, and she knew God, who had given her all she had, was worth giving her all to. Once again, it's that thought of what does impress us. If simply monetary things impresses us, well, those will be the things that we live for. We will live for to be impressive monetarily. And it's not that having things is bad. Rather, it is the heart to which things are given, and we'll see that. We can very quickly fall into this trap of materialism. I think if we were all honest with each other, we would say that has already taken place in our life at one time or another, where we fell in love with material things more than what we should do. Sometimes we simply evaluate people based on that. We evaluate people based on where they live, what they wear, what they have, what they drive, what their worth is to me in regards to their friendship. But the fact is that's not how we should live. The Bible tells us in Luke chapter 12, verse 15 says, "And he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth." It's a reminder that it does not matter the material things that we have. Because when our life is centered on financial status or material possession, we really find our life on very dangerous ground. And so we must see what God sees. We must be impressed with what God is impressed with. Here's a widow with nothing to her name. Well, see, and her name isn't even mentioned. Yet she is highlighted by Jesus himself for us to learn from. First, we see the presence of God. Next, we see the poverty of the woman. And lastly, we see the participation in the gift. The Bible tells us from verse 41 and 42, "And many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which made a farthing." The first thing we see about her participation is she saw an opportunity. She saw an opportunity. This widow, although she was poor, saw an opportunity to give something. It's a reminder that regardless of our financial state, we can still give something, and we should never miss an opportunity to give. God promises to bless those that give. God promises to multiply those who give. Why would we ever turn down an opportunity to give to the Lord? I think she saw this not just as an opportunity, but also an obligation. I think we could look at this woman and think, why was she even there? She did not go down to the market to buy anything. She didn't have any money. She was not going to get something to eat. She had only 2 mites. This was a woman that came down for a particular purpose. She felt obligated to give, and that's why she gave all she had. She saw an opportunity to give, and I believe she felt an obligation to that. If we can visualize this woman in our mind, I think we would begin to study her life out a little bit more of appreciate and have more appreciation for exactly what she did. We don't know how far she traveled. We don't know how many days she went without food. We don't know even the state of her being. We know that she's recognized as a poor widow, but maybe her clothes were dirty, whatever it may have been. And as we visualize her coming before, once again, with just these 2 mites and casting them into the offering plate before the Lord and giving these things, she gave all. And I think, what if we had that same determination to give? And I'm not simply talking about money. God saw the intention behind what was given. Why? Because many had already put in a lot more than she did. They gave out of their abundance, which they should do. And it wasn't that Jesus necessarily wasn't even, once again, they gave of obedience, but none of them gave sacrificially as this woman. The intent of her heart was pure. Could you imagine if each and every time we went to church, somebody was there giving encouragement, comfort, direction, and love each and every service? But let me ask you this. Could you imagine if that was you giving out those things every time that we went to the Lord's house? Could you imagine what places our church would be, what type of place our church would be if the sole purpose that we went to church was to give? And once again, I'm not talking about simply an offering. I'm talking about to give of ourselves to another person, to give of ourselves to that ministry of encouragement, to that ministry of comfort, to that ministry of direction, to that ministry that we all are called to love. It would be a wonderful place, and our church would be lively with love and giving. Why? Because having a giving attitude, it's infectious. I believe after this particular story happened in Scripture, that when the disciples finally understood what was taking place and other people heard, that there was probably some there that also had little, that were afraid to give the little that they had for fear of people looking like, well, that's just a little, that then gave their little as well. Why? Because of this woman's participation in the offering. What it earned her was a commendation from the master. Once again, it wasn't, Jesus didn't speak after the rich had given all their things. He spoke after this woman did. Now the disciples, I have to imagine that they were very interested in what the rich gave. Now, if you could liken it to our day and age, it would be like sitting in front of the church offering receptacle when people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whoever, name a rich person, gave, and you think, well, how much did that person give? Because they have so much. We would be impressed by that. But this woman was impressed God in a way that the rich could not. And he commended her because of that. It is what impressed the Lord. And what he did from there was he did what only he can do. Because when we give of ourselves, there is a certain multiplier that we cannot know. How is it that 2 mites were worth more than all the large gifts that were given that day? That's what Jesus said, that she gave more. And the only way that would be possible is for God to take the little and turn it into big. And God alone can only touch our gift and multiply it over and over to meet the needs. It's that reminder that God can take the small things and turn them into something that our mind cannot comprehend. We can have no recognizable name, maybe even within the church. We can have no worth in the world's eyes. We can have been impoverished, or whatever it may be in your life that you think is little, that you think makes you little. You can take and use that and give that to the Lord and allow Him to do something big with the little that you've given Him. God not only knows what we give, He knows what we keep. God not only knows the amount, but He knows what we don't give in. God knew the heart of this lady, and He was impressed. I can't get over that word. That He was, I believe He was impressed by her, of what she had given. God's desire for us is to love and worship Him with all of our heart, all of our mind, with all of our soul, and with all of our strength. That is His commandments to us. That's what His desire is for us. And when we love God with our all, He has our all, whether it be little or whether it be much. And we won't hold anything back. What a good reminder from this lady with no name and no money.